If you follow me over on Instagram, you already know this, but if you don't follow me over there, by the way, at neurodivergent_magic, but if you don't follow me over there, you might not know that I have been recently officially diagnosed with both autism and ADHD combined type. And people have a lot of questions on how I went about getting both of those diagnoses, what the process was like, and I just thought I would use this video to explain what the diagnostic process was like for me. Now, this video does come with a pretty big caveat in that every diagnostic place is going to operate a little bit differently, but this is how it was for me and how it might be for you. Hi, my name is Megan and welcome to Neurodivergent Magic, the YouTube channel for accessible and relatable neurodivergent content. All right, so there were 8 main steps that I took to get my ADHD and autism diagnoses. They were looking for assessors, getting on the wait list, scheduling my first appointment, the diagnostic interview, scheduling my second appointment, taking screeners and standardized type tests, the results appointment, and receiving my official paperwork. So let's break down all of those steps. Step number 1 is finding an assessor that you trust. And this is really important. I have a lot of people reach out to me saying that they would love to be assessed for autism or ADHD or both, but they are so worried about being dismissed. And I absolutely understand that. Being dismissed is not a small thing. It's a huge invalidation and it can make you question everything about your world. And I understand people wanting to avoid that. So what I did to find an assessor that I trust is I started out by going to the neuroclastic directory of diagnosticians, which I will link in the description below. But this is basically a directory put together by actually autistic people who have been assessed by these people and support them and recommend them. This directory has a list of assessors available in different countries, different states, different cities, literally almost everywhere in the world. I found one near me and I reached out to them. And I didn't just reach out and say, hey, sign me up. I reached out and I said, hey, I am self-diagnosed autistic. Being autistic is a huge part of my identity at this point, and I need to know that if you're going to assess me, and if you find that I am not autistic, I need to know that you will provide me with another answer that actually makes sense to me. I just laid all my cards on the table like that. I was like, look, this is what I'm going to need from you. Can you do that or not? And I was very lucky. She responded and she said, hey, by the time people find me, they usually know what's going on, so you shouldn't really expect any surprises. But if there are some surprises, we will work through them together. You have my promise. And that felt very, very good. That was so reassuring. I knew that this was the right assessor for me based off of her response right there. So that was step 1. Step 2 is very simple. Get on the wait list. Now, depending on where you go, the wait list could be very, very, very long. I got lucky and the wait list was actually shockingly short. It was 7 to 12 weeks. Those 12 weeks went by and I hadn't heard anything, so I reached out and I said, hey, I just wanted to check in. I know I'm on the wait list. Should I be scheduling, or is there anything that I can do or that you need me to do right now? And they were like, oh, this is great. Yes, it's perfect timing for reaching out. We need you to schedule your first appointment, which is step 3. Very, very simple. They sent me some intake paperwork that was, I'm trying to remember exactly what they had me fill out. It was a couple of questions about my psychiatric history, had I reached out for help before, medications I was on, and they also had me take the ACE quiz, which is just a quiz assessing your adverse childhood experiences. This was another huge green flag for me that this place knew what they were doing, because unfortunately, a lot of neurodivergent folks are traumatized just by nature of living in a world that is not really built for neurodivergent folks. But other trauma not related to neurodivergence can look like a lot of forms of neurodivergence. So this was a huge green flag for me that they were like, hey, we should assess their level of trauma and see if maybe that's what's going on and not neurodivergence, or maybe it's both. So I just thought that was it was a huge green flag for me. Okay, so this leads us to step number 4 in the process, which was the diagnostic interview. This is what most people want to know about, I think. But this is where I showed up, I sat in a waiting room for about 5 minutes, and then I went into an office with both the assessor and a nurse who was there taking notes. The office was nice and dimly lit, no fluorescent lighting, but also bright enough we could see each other. It wasn't dimly lit. It was just not in your face lights, which was very accommodating, I thought, for a lot of autistic folks. There were also fidgets on the table that I was welcomed to mess with if I needed to, and the assessor actually was messing with a fidget most of the time that we were talking, so I felt very welcome to mess with the fidgets if I needed to. I actually wore a fidgety necklace to the assessment because I knew I was going to need to fidget with something, so it worked out. Basically, in the diagnostic interview, they asked me about all of the things you would expect. I was asked about sensory preferences. Are there certain sensory experiences I avoid or things that I seek out? I was asked about my social life. Do I have friends? How often do I contact people who I love? How do I interact with people when I do see them? But there were also some interesting questions that I wasn't necessarily expecting. They just asked me to talk about my interests for a while, and I was totally thrown off by that. I was like, I don't know. I'm obsessed with psychology and small business. That's more or less my whole life. And my husband and my baby, that's what I do with my entire existence. And there was one question, which I can't even remember what the question was, but I remember telling the assessor, hey, I don't know how to answer this. And she was very kind. She was like, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Half the time, we're not even really listening for your answers. We are listening for the way you answer the question, which was a little intimidating to me. So just fair warning, they're paying attention to how you answer even more than they're paying attention to what you say when you do answer. Which to me, I was like, but what if I misconstrue something or I answer something in a weird way? That was a little uncomfortable, but also when I got the report, which we'll get to it towards the end, I understood what she meant. So I will say every diagnostic interview is going to be different. It's going to depend on you and your assessor and the environment and what kind of questions they decide to ask. I don't think this is a very standardized procedure. I think it's very much here are some questions you can ask and then follow the flow of conversation, basically. So I think it's going to be very different every time. But mine was really enjoyable. I basically got to talk about my brain for an hour. It was about an hour long, hour 15 maybe. And that was really fun for me. I love talking about my brain. Like I said, psychology is one of my special interests. And so getting to talk about autism and all of this stuff was really, really great. Oh, and as a side note, people tend to ask me if I got assessed for autism and ADHD separately, if I had to ask for both assessments at the same time, and that's not really how it worked. I basically went in for the autism assessment, and about halfway through the diagnostic interview, she was like, have you ever considered that you might have ADHD? And I was like, yeah, I've thought about it, but I don't really know. I'm definitely not as sure about it as I am about the autism. And she's like, yeah, that's absolutely fair, but just some of the things that you've said, it makes me curious. I think we're going to pay attention to that, and I might give you some tests based on ADHD as well. And I was like, oh, that's fine, but what kind of comments have I made that tipped you off? And she was like, well, you said that you got sad the other night, and so you decided to write a book proposal. That right there is a good enough reason to screen for ADHD. So that was very funny. But basically, I didn't go in expecting an ADHD diagnosis. I did go in telling them, hey, I have no idea what's going on in my brain. I am 90% sure I'm autistic, but I also have, concerns or suspicions about ADHD, CPTSD, BPD, all kinds of stuff. And I honestly have no idea what's going on and I need help. And so they knew to be on the lookout for pretty much anything. So that leads us to step number 5, which is scheduling the second appointment, which is the results appointment. So for me, they offered to do it virtually, which is great because this place was an hour away, which isn't terrible, but if I can do it virtually, that is awesome. So that was an option for me. So that's what I decided to do. We just scheduled at the end of the diagnostic interview. And again, this might be different for you. They might have a different scheduling process, but this is how it was where I went. Then there was step number 6, which is another one that people have a lot of questions about, which is filling out the screeners and questionnaires about my brain. Basically, the assessor gave me, I think 6 different screeners for OCD, PTSD, depression, generalized anxiety disorder, and maybe a couple of other things that she just wanted to check for. These screeners are not diagnostic tools. They are just hey, do we need to investigate this further or no? And I will say, as a side note, I got the lowest score on the depression screener that I have ever gotten, which is unbelievable. I always score through the roof on depression screeners because I have major depressive disorder, and I am depressed or emotionally dysregulated much of the time, or at least I used to be. And now I'm just not. And it was so relieving to see that low number. So in addition to the screeners, I also got some standardized tests that assessed my social relatedness score, I think was one, my executive dysfunction was another, and then my sensory profile. So there were 3 big standardized tests that I had to take. And in addition to me taking them, the assessor also had my husband take the executive dysfunction one and the social relatedness one, so that she could see his point of view of me. And taking those was really interesting. Like, there were a couple of weird questions on there that she actually explained to me in the results session, in the results appointment. But for the most part, it was helpful. It was nice to be like, yeah, this is what affects me and this is what doesn't. Okay, so then we have step number 6, which is the results appointment. So we sat down and we looked at the results of those 3 big tests that she had me take, and the weird questions. So like, one of the questions on there, for instance, was like, sometimes I forget my own name. And I like hesitated when I got to that one. I was like, I mean, no, I don't forget my name. Sometimes I forget I'm a person. Sometimes I forget I exist. When people use my name, I feel very strange, but I don't forget my name. So I clicked never because I don't. And she explained that there are questions in there that are meant to sort out, like, are you faking feels like the wrong word, but are you maybe exaggerating your experience in order to get diagnosed? And that was one of them. That's one of the questions that sort of sorts people out. So I was like, oh, is it bad that I hesitated? She's like, no, of course not. But you answered it honestly, which is that you never forget your name. So anyway, that was interesting. That was a really helpful thing that she did in the results appointment that I hope every assessor does, is she went through the validity measures and she showed me, look, this is how we assess to see if people are maybe exaggerating or maybe not being totally truthful with us. These are the measures we use. Your measures came back that you were being wholly truthful and wholly honest about your experience. And that felt so good as someone with serious imposter syndrome about her neurodivergence. It was so nice to be like, oh, I'm not faking. This is real. This is real. Then the final step was getting my results paperwork, which was very disconcerting. It was very odd to read about myself in that much detail. Plus, I consider myself someone who's relatively high masking. I mask all the time to the point where it's basically subconscious. I'm doing it a lot. And this person, my assessor, she saw straight through that mask. And that feels very, very good. But it also feels a little intrusive. It feels a little like, oh no, someone saw me for the real me. They're gonna dismiss me. They're gonna hate me. They're gonna reject me. Which she didn't. She was super nice. She sent over the paperwork, and then a week later, she sent over another email like, hey, how are you feeling about the paperwork? Is there anything I can do for you? So, I hope every assessor is as amazing as mine was. I hope everybody's assessor follows up with them and sends, very helpful insights in the report. I know not every situation is going to be like that, but that's my hope, is that everybody gets as good of an assessor as I had. So yeah, that is the process that I went through to get diagnosed with both autism and ADHD. It was a really affirming experience, and it was really positive, really validating. I know it's not that way for everyone, but this is what I went through. And I hope my tips at the beginning about picking a good assessor will help you have a similar experience. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next Tuesday. Bye.